slavery in the Bible. Now this video is going to have a lot of information. I've seen a lot of people on YouTube say that the Bible advocates slavery. I think the Bible makes it very clear that slavery under the Mosaic Law and slavery we know today are totally different things. But I've heard some atheists claim that biblical slaves were bought and sold, that they did not have equal rights, that it was okay to beat your slaves, and that God does not oppose the injustice of slavery. So I'm going to address these issues and a couple more. That biblical slavery does not involve slave traders or view slaves as inferior. A person becomes a slave if they are unable to pay a debt. Slaves have the same right as their masters, and it was really just a difference in economic status. And if you don't have to take my word for it, I'm going to show you some evidence. So let's see what the Bible has to say. Starting in Deuteronomy 15:12. If a fellow Hebrew, a man or woman, sells himself to you and serves 6 years, and in the 7th year you must let him go free. Sells himself to you? Yep, that's what it says. So he sells himself. But to be fair, that verse doesn't say anything about slave traders, but these next two verses do. If we take a look at Exodus 21:16, it says, anyone who kidnaps another and sells him, or still has him when he is caught, must be put to death. So if you're a slave trader, you get put to death. And Deuteronomy 24:7, if a man is caught kidnapping one of his brother Israelites and treats him as a slave or sells him, the kidnapper must die. You must purge the evil from among you. So this verse repeats that if you are a slave trader, you die. So it must be important. Not only does the law not allow the buying and selling of slaves, but you get put to death for it. So I would say it's pretty heavily discouraged. So now we're going to take a look at what the Bible says about the rights of slaves. Deuteronomy 16:12. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and follow carefully these decrees. Now this verse shows us that the Israelites knew what it was like to be true slaves, and they did not model that behavior. The slaves actually had feasts and days off just like all the rest of the people. Deuteronomy 15:12-14. In the 7th year you must let him go free, and when you release him, do not send him away empty-handed. Supply him liberally from your flock. So, this verse is saying that it's about the year of Jubilee, and their debt would be pardoned on the 7th year. This also helps us realize that they were not sold into slavery, but became slaves because of their debt. It also shows us that their masters were very kind to them. So now let's look at Exodus 23:9. Do not oppress an alien. You yourselves know how it feels to be aliens, because you were aliens in the land of Egypt. So this makes a distinction between the oppressive slavery in Egypt and the slavery seen in Israel. Leviticus 19:34 says, the alien living among you must be treated as one of your native born. Love him as yourself. You were aliens in Egypt. I am the Lord your God. So here we're supposed to treat him as a native born and love him as yourself. That's not even reminiscent of the slavery we know today. So now let's talk about lifelong slavery. As mentioned earlier, if an Israelite took another Israelite as a slave, they would be pardoned 7 years later. An Israelite only became a slave for life if he wanted to. And this is seen in Deuteronomy 15, verses 16 and 17. But if your servant says to you, I do not want to leave you because he loves you and your family as well, loves you and your family and is well off with you, then take an awl and push it through his earlobe to the door, and he will become your servant for life. Do the same for your maidservant. So this is clearly a choice. If you want to stay, you can, and if you don't, you can leave. So now I'm going to check out Leviticus 25, verses 44 and 46, because these verses are probably misinterpreted the most often. This verse deals with slaves coming from foreign nations, and the only real difference between those slaves and the Israelite slaves is that the year of Jubilee did not apply to them. The year of Jubilee was a cultural perk for the Israelites. So, Leviticus 25:44. Your male and female slaves are to come from the nations around you. From them you may buy slaves. This verse is describing the same type of slavery used on the fellow Israelites. We know this because the King James Version explains that fairly clearly. And in this verse, people were not buying slaves from traders. The money goes to the person selling himself into slavery, or goes to pay off his debt. Now, Leviticus 25, verse 46. You can will them to your children as intellectual property and make them slaves for life. Since the year of Jubilee does not occur, foreigners' debts were not pardoned every 7 years. They could serve for longer periods, and they could even serve for their natural life as slaves. It was not always lifelong, it just depended on the amount of debt. Now let's look at God's supposed instructions on how to beat your slaves to death. Alright, Exodus 21:20. If a man beats his male or female slave with a rod, and the slave dies as a direct result, he must be punished. Now, if we look at Deuteronomy 19:21, we can see exactly what this punishment is. Show no pity, life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. So the punishment of beating your slave is death. Now let's look at Exodus 21:21. But he is not to be punished if the slave gets up after a day or two, since the slave is his property. So what that's saying is that if you don't end up killing your slave and he gets up and he lives, then you're not punished by death. But what you are punished by is seen in Exodus 21:27. And if he knocks out the tooth of a manservant or maidservant, he must let the servant go free to compensate for the tooth. So if there's ever any serious injury to a slave, then the slave gets to go free and is pardoned of his debt. Now to see what God really thinks about slavery, we can check out Deuteronomy 23:15-16. And this says, "If a slave has taken refuge with you, do not hand him over to his master. Let him live among you, whatever he likes, and in whatever town he chooses. Do not oppress him." So what this is saying is that God does not advocate oppressive slavery by returning the slave to their captors. Instead, he gives them free refuge. Now God has opposed the unfair treatment of individuals in the Old Testament. In Egypt, he punished them with the 10 plagues for the wrongful captivity and abuse of the Jews. The New Testament also takes a stance against slavery by commanding that we do unto others as you'd have them do unto you, and that we love our neighbor as ourselves. Christian teachings simply do not support the injustices of slavery.